Sure. Hi everyone. Thanks for joining the fifth webinar series from NPCI Innovation Team. In this VUCA world, everyone is talking that how IT will take and do the transformation. So the topic we have chosen today is very much helpful to come up with new strategies and even change the mindset of the organizations which want to come up and overcome this COVID-19 situation. So we have three guests from ThoughtWorks, Mr. Vikrant, Mr. Akshay, and Mr. Sriram. They will take you over the topic on innovation with Agile. And we have reached out, we have gone through your questions, and I'm very much hopeful that these guys will cover all the questions which you have asked us for the Agile, and definitely will give you a breather as well as the experience which is required to implement Agile in your organization. So over to you, Vikrant.
Sure. Yeah, thank you, sir. And hello, everyone. And very happy to be part of this webinar, and thanks to NPCI for organizing this. So we'll actually go through, this session of Agile today, and we'll actually start with some introduction to Agile, looking at some core concepts, from a slightly different perspective. And we'll just go through those details together today. Yeah. So coming from the payments side and payments industry, right? I think there's a lot of change in terms of the way people have been using these electronic payments, in the past few years, right? Like I personally use payment apps like Google Pay or Paytm, and so on. Like I'm sure many of you also might be using different types of payment apps because no one wants to go to banks these days, and like the cash transactions also kind of going lower in number. There was an interesting event that happened back in March in this year, where Yes Bank was put under moratorium by RBI. What happened also along with that was that there was this popular application called as PhonePe that provides UPI transactions or UPI payments actually. That also went down because it was actually utilizing the infrastructure and APIs provided by Yes Bank. But what was notable was that the way Yes Bank, the way PhonePe, ICICI Bank, and NPCI were really able to bring that back up within 24 hours, right? So what happened really there was that all the infrastructure that was pointing to Yes Bank was now pointing to ICICI within a matter of 24 hours, right? So that was tremendous, and it's a great example of agility shown by these three organizations. Compare this with the traditional ways of handling that would have required going through certain change requests, doing the detailed analysis, having sign-offs, etc. Some part of it would have been done, but in a very lean and agile fashion, and that was really tremendous to kind of see from there. Yeah. So great example of agility there. At the same time, even though that was more of like a emergency kind of a situation, so and again great demonstration, but at the same time business conditions actually have been evolving over the past few years, right? Even if it is not an emergency situation, but the environment or the circumstances businesses operate is changing because of competitors, because of changing market conditions, etc. Yeah. At the same time, there are also changes in the customer preferences also, right? Like for example, a few years back when I first used the check deposit facility in a ATM, it was a customer delight for me, but not anymore. I really don't want to go deposit checks. I just want the payment electronically, right? Which is also then resulting in rapidly changing requirements as well. So, but that's where the customers, that's where these requirement changes, etc., are happening. And they are actually happening even with a faster pace now. So it is a very like Ashutosh mentioned earlier. We are actually living in this VUCA world, where things are changing rapidly. Quite. Yeah. At the same time, on the other hand, if you look at the development context, and specifically from the software development context, right, it needs knowledge workers. It needs people who can really utilize the languages, the tool sets, and the frameworks in a fashion that they can knit all together and create a fully working and testing software that's usable by the users. And obviously for doing that, they need to have craft, innovation, and science. So it's a combination of that. Additionally, history has shown us that software development was never plan friendly as such. And like, you would have seen that in the waterfall methodology that like, when we have long plans and like, at the end, we see, either a bunch of issues or bugs or integration problems or customer not happy with what was delivered, right? So, and that's where agile comes into picture. It actually really like, ties these things together, and it's all about a mindset. And it's a way of building products, which is expect and planning around that, right? So change is actually welcome here, and that is how all the agile frameworks around that have been created also follow that, right? And this whole mindset was actually converted and published in the form of a manifesto back in 2001, which consisted of 4 values. I'm sure most of you would have seen these values. And at the same time, there were 2 of the people from those 17 signatories that were actually from ThoughtWorks, who are still with ThoughtWorks and working with us. So what we will do today is that we will actually go through some details of these values and try to connect them actually with the practices, that how you can really put these into practices. Okay, so let's actually start looking at those. Starting from the first one, the individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So agile is all about human collaboration and like working together, right? As we're talking about changing requirements and like rapidly changing environments also, it is vital that the people who are building the software really collaborate in a much faster fashion, right? And that's why the individuals and interactions, it takes a precedence over process and tools. It's not that process and tools are not useful or not required, but always we would if you were to choose, we would rather choose people in interaction and directly talking with people, right? So practices like pair programming, which comes from where two developers sit together and build software, that is one of those practices that inherently encourages human interaction. Team spaces that are there, like so no cubicles or no walls in between, so people sit together and like the collaboration and interactions are actually encouraged with that. Similarly, other things like team ceremonies that are there. Most of the ceremonies that you would see within the agile frameworks are all team ceremonies. So they are not like specific rules type of ceremonies. And as well as looking at the status boards also, like when most teams actually have their walls filled up with their status boards. They could be physical walls or electronic, but either way, they are all available, open, and transparent to everyone, right? Which again, like promotes that kind of interaction. Second one is working software over comprehensive documentation. This is actually one of my favorite ones, because most people then start thinking that, okay, I read an agile manifesto that documentation is not required. The fact here is that it's just that we focus more on a working software than creating large documents, which are maybe either used just once or don't generate much value. As an example I can give here is that, like in my earlier days of development when I started my career, I was working for a company that was using Rational Unified Process (RUP) at that time. We spent almost 4.5 months, 4.5 to 5 months to generate a whole bunch of documentation, including 16 types of UML diagrams. But for those 4.5 to 5 months, we did not really have any working software, even though it was supposed to be a software development project, right? So idea here is that, like, do lean design documentation if you have to, and make use of that, okay? And less around those, like, very, very heavy FSDs or FRDs, because requirements do change, right? And so do design. So design also evolves as the time goes. Continuous delivery and automated builds are there to support those working software as well. I have been in projects where I had to literally create a form and given to a DBA so that my database schema could be deployed, right? But if you have automated pipelines, like, and have all the environments are integrated, those type of documentation also gone away. And additionally, even from a coding standpoint, it's like, we have self-documenting work. When you have these Kanban walls, there are no separate project plans being updated as such. Yeah. And same goes for the coding practices as well. You could have, like, naming conventions in such a way, you could have proper refactoring in a way that the code is really understandable and like navigable easily. Yeah. The third one is customer collaboration, contract negotiation. And again, I can give a quick example here. Like, so as part of a project that I executed back in New York, we used to deliver our work, in iterations. So every couple of weeks, we would deliver working software to the end users, and then the very next Tuesday, we will actually go to the center where the users were sitting and they were using our software. So we would have a separate sort of like a working meeting with them where we would answer their questions, explain certain features, and also take certain feedback as well, right? It was amazing. It was, sometimes like, we were in awe, awe-inspiring position also that, okay, hey, oh, this is also that the users are thinking, right? So it was great way of interacting with them, and you can actually use, practices like, regular customer showcases like we did, right? You could do monthly or a quarterly customer studies as well. As far as you are collaborating with them and like welcoming their feedback and change, right? That is the key, because ultimately at the end of the day, you are building the software for them, right? So it makes sense to hear them and welcoming the change and feedback that they're giving us. And the last value is respond, over following a plan. So things like iterative development by nature itself is designed in a way that it actually helps responding to change, because we are not really planning for a long time. Like iterations are usually 2 weeks, right? Even if you look at the product roadmaps, also they're quarterly, but then they're again iterated and updated on a regular basis, right? As the feedback comes, as the new learnings are there. So it's all about responding to change, instead of saying that, okay, here is my plan and I'm going to follow that for 6 months, right? But that's not what happens in Agile. And that is what these 4 values of the Agile Manifesto, that how they can be put together in to practice. These are not the a comprehensive list of practices. These are just some examples, but just to set things in context. If you have any other practices also that you've seen, feel free to sort of share with us on chat. That will be nice and interesting to see. But this is not the comprehensive list of all the practices put together, but just to explain, how these concepts can be applied. Yeah. So additionally, in the Agile world, as we know that Scrum has picked up quite a lot, and it's one of the kind of like a preferred framework that is utilized by most of the people. I think one thing to point out here is that many teams and many people actually focus more on the process part of it, like the way exactly the way Scrum has said, and that is perfect to do. But if you look at these events like sprint planning, backlog refinement, grooming, daily stand-up, etc., it is good to know that, okay, exactly what you're doing in the planning meeting, for example, essentially you are looking at the estimates and picking up the stories that you can use to kind of create the sprint commitment for the upcoming sprint, and then create a sprint backlog out of it, right? But then again, at the end of the day, what you were the reason why you were doing that was to create the next working increment, which is in line with the larger product roadmap, which is then will contribute to the achieving the larger product goal, right? That is the real reason why you're doing that, right? So it's important to focus on the reason behind why you did certain things in the sprint planning, right? Same thing goes for daily stand-up as well. People do come together and they share that, okay, this is what I worked yesterday, this is what I'm going to do today, and here are my impediments. But the reason, another reason why you do that is because it encourages collaboration, it encourages problem solving, it encourages that team spirit, and helping each other, right? So that's another thing. And at the end of the day, also again, helping achieve the overall sprint goal as well, right? Additionally, if you look at the larger benefits of following such approach, for such a iterative approach, you actually get a faster time to market because you are incrementally delivering software in the market, right? And if you're doing that with the certain set of practices, you will actually get a faster user feedback as well, because you're putting the software in the user's hands, right? And if you do that, then obviously you will have better customer satisfaction, because then you're iteratively implementing the feedback as well and incorporating back into your iterations, right? And this will eventually give you a better product fit for the better market fit for the product, right? And if all of those things are happening, there's no reason why the employee engagement won't be there or stakeholder engagement won't be there, right? So they'll be much more engaged because of the highly, engaging type of practices that are kind of followed over there using this kind of. So having said that, there are still some more details that are worth considering, and when you kind of practice these things, you will actually, there are the details, there is a, devil in the details. Okay, so I would invite Srinam, to actually take us through a very interesting story that he has to share with us. So Sriram, over to you. I am switching also the control screen sharing to you as a presenter. So, you could, once you receive that, you could start sharing your screen as well.
Thank you, Vikrant. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'll take over from here and I'll talk about why Scrum is necessary, but from an overall organization's objectives point of view, it's not enough. And I want to explain this with an example of a situation that a ThoughtWorks team encountered several years ago. So there was this client in a different industry, but I think this story is such that it is applicable for wherever product development happens, irrespective of industry. And in this particular case, the client, they invited the ThoughtWorks team to perform an agile assessment. And one of the problem statements they gave to this team was that even though the team in their organization was already following Scrum, they found that they were still getting too many defects close to the release date. And so they wanted the ThoughtWorks team to take a look into this particular issue as well and come up with some recommendations to improve the situation. And so the way I'm going to talk about this story is using this table and this template, where we start with the problem given by the client, which was that there were too many defects at a late stage near the release. But as we begin to understand what the underlying problem is, we will populate this table and we will try to classify the various issues we encounter under different categories. And we will also try to understand who is in a position to do something about those issues. Yeah, so we will build up this table as we go along. So the team, they started with this thing about, okay, there are too many defects close to the release date, right? And there were many things that they were trying to understand why that is the case. But one of the things they found early on was that a moment a developer finishes a story and moves on to the next story, the testers obviously were not immediately picking it up for testing. It would take a couple of days for the build to be deployed into the test environment and so on. And what the assessment team found was that in most cases, as soon as the testers picked up a particular build and to test the stories, they would immediately start finding a lot of issues, and it would basically come back to the developers. So at a very early stage, there was a lot of back and forth between developers and testers, and builds going from development environment to test environment and so on. And that is not a healthy sign. At an early stage, you don't want to have so much back and forth. And one of the practices that ThoughtWorks teams practice in order to avoid this situation is something that we refer to as desk checks. So what is a desk check? It's an informal mechanism of some very early testing to minimize this early back and forth. So if I as a developer, if I am done with a particular story, then I would not simply move on to the next story. Instead, what I am expected to do is I'm expected to invite the product owner or the business analyst or a tester to come and sit beside me for 10-15 minutes, go through whatever I have done, and make sure that at a high level, like everything is in place, nothing is missing. And if they find out anything that's missing, then I'm expected to make a note of it in my notebook. Again, work on it for half an hour, 1 hour, whatever it takes to fix those things. And again, call them, make sure that they are okay with it, and only then progress to the next story. Right? So we call this as a desk check. It's not really, you probably won't find it in the Scrum manual or something, but over a period of time, we have found that doing this helps avoid these kind of very early back and forth between the development environment and the test environment. So when we suggested this, the team, when they suggested this to the test lead of the client's team, the test lead didn't seem very impressed with this suggestion. He had his doubts about it. And he had multiple objections. The first objection was that he felt like, he's like, what do you mean? Like, if the developer finishes a story in the middle of a day, is he just going to call out to us? And are we expected to drop our work and go and sit with this developer for 10-15 minutes? Is that what you're suggesting? And we were like, yes, that's what we are suggesting. After all, you are one team. And so within one team, there should be, it should be okay to, go and sit with another team member ad hoc and, collaborate a little. Like, it should not every interaction should require a meeting request, right? But he said, no, we don't work like this. Our work is fully planned for the whole week. I have to submit my work plans. I have to tell my project manager that Wednesday morning, I'll be writing these test scripts. Wednesday afternoon, I'll be executing these test scripts and so on. And so, you can't just interrupt me. A developer can't just interrupt me like this. We tried pointing the Agile manifesto to the test lead. Like Vikrant just pointed out individuals and interactions over processes and tools. And we said, hey, here is a good opportunity to prioritize individuals and interactions, right? You are one team. But again, the test lead was like, no, this is not how we work. You can go talk to the project manager. And so we went to the project manager, the team, and they basically explained that, see, the interactions in your team, they're somewhat constrained. People are not free to interact. And that is creating some challenges. If you're suggesting some ideas, it's creating some challenges in adopting those ideas. And the project manager was like, yeah, fine, but this is how the whole organization works. This is not, I have not come up with this way of working. This is the work culture here. So if you want to do something about it, you need to talk to the leadership, right? So we can see that as we begin investigating this issue, we are entering different territories, right? We now have a culture, potentially a culture issue here. And so we said, okay, we made a note of it. This team made a note of it. And then they said, okay, let's say we are able to address this issue. Then are you able to follow this practice? Then the test lead came up with a second objection. And the second objection was that, if I sit with the developer for 10-15 minutes, and if I point out some issues, it's not good enough that the developer just makes a note of these issues in his notebook. That's not good enough. I need to log them in Jira as defects. Otherwise, I'm not following the process. And we said, that's fine. We understand you have to put things in Jira, and you can do that when you're testing a build formally in the test environment. Right now, you're just doing an informal early check in the developer's own laptop. And the test lead said, no, that doesn't work for us. I don't decide these things. These processes are decided by the director of quality, and the director of quality has said that as a tester, if I find anything, I must report it in Jira. And that's how it goes to the developers. And he said, if you don't do this, it's going to create traceability problems. And we will not be able to include that issue in our regression test suite. And to that, actually, that was, we said that is not really true, because if the developers were truly practicing test-driven development, then if I'm a developer and somebody points out something is missing, and I'm practicing test-driven development, then I'm expected to first write a failing test to recreate that missing scenario, and then write the code which will pass that test, and then check in both the test and the production code. And this is the true way of doing test-driven development, and this will take care of traceability. It will take care of regression also. But the test lead had not really heard about this. The developers in the team had also not very familiar with this way of doing test-driven development. When they say TDD, all they meant was they were writing unit tests. That's all, right? They were not really practicing test-driven development the way it is meant to be practiced. So that particular issue was something that potentially the team itself could address with the right kind of skills and training. Afterwards, when we discussed this particular issue a little more, we found out that actually there were some other issues also that the test lead wasn't really sharing with us. We found out that all the testers were, one of the KPIs for all the testers was number of defects reported per tester per week. And this was one of their KPIs for performance review purposes. And this KPIs was part of the overall governance mechanism in the organization, right? So because of this KPI, we understood that the tester was naturally somewhat reluctant to give away these defects for free. The moment they find something, they want to log it into Jira because that's how they get the credit for it. And if you want to really do something about it, if you want to change the tester's behavior, then really the SVP of engineering needs to look at the overall governance setup in that organization, the way people were being measured, and change the measures so that people are able to collaborate better with each other. And as a team, when we discuss this, why do the testers have one set of KPIs and the developers have another set of KPIs? Because obviously everybody understands that the real overall objective is to build a great product. But then we realize that it is the design of the organization itself which is contributing to this different sets of KPIs for different people. Because although it looked like one Scrum team, one cross-functional Scrum team, but the reporting lines was not cross-functional. The reporting lines were mono-functional. The developers reported separately, the testers reported separately, and because of that reporting structure, the KPIs were also sort of tailored to those set of activities, right? So the developer vertical had development related KPIs, the tester vertical had testing related KPIs, and it was creating collaboration challenges on the ground. So really, here is an opportunity for the leadership, the CIO and the CTO, to recognize this problem and to really reevaluate whether this function-based matrix organization is the best kind of organization for agile product development. So that's one line of investigation that started off with desk checks, and desk checks are mainly about application level testing. There was also issues with end-to-end testing. So I'll quickly talk about that, because we asked the team, like, there was a separate end-to-end testing team, and we asked this team whether, before the build went to the end-to-end testing team, can they carry out one dry run of end-to-end testing on their own? And the team said, no, obviously not. We don't have the environments to do end-to-end testing. That was a fair enough, reasonable, proper reason for that. So we said, okay, you don't have the environments, we understand, but can you at least just mentally go through the end-to-end test scripts and try to see if there are any obvious problems? And that's where they said, potentially we can, but we've asked, the end-to-end testing will not share the test scripts with us. They only share it when they find a defect. And later on, we figured the reason for that was that end-to-end testing was outsourced to an independent testing vendor. And in the contract of this vendor with the organization, one of the performance parameters was how many end-to-end defects the vendor would find, right? And because of that parameter in the contract, the vendor would not want to give away the defects for free by sharing the end-to-end defects in advance, the end-to-end test scripts in advance. And this problem can be addressed potentially by the head of procurement, who is in charge of all the outsourcing contracts. And if they can make sure that the performance parameters do not include things that actually discourage collaboration between teams, then you can try to be more agile as an organization, right? So through this example, what I wanted to point out is all these other things that are here: org design, culture, governance, metrics, the way you are outsourcing, all of them collectively are referred to as the operating model of the organization. Yeah. And the point of this whole story was to point out that just Scrum is not enough. Scrum is necessary, but we also need to create an agile friendly operating model if we want the overall objective of product innovation and effective agile product development. So next I'll hand over to my colleague Akshay, who will continue with this a little bit, but more from the angle of organization culture.
Thanks, Sriram. Cool. Hi, everyone. So we're going to continue with Sriram's story a little bit. But like he said, we're going to look at it from an agile culture perspective as well. And before we do that, let's look at why culture is important. So change, like we know, is the essence of agile methodology. And the whole thinking in agile is based on the fact that change is inevitable, and you have to figure out a way of dealing with that change rather than hiding behind rigid processes and rules. And so that change is not just limited to the requirements that you're getting from your users. That change could also be in the form of the way of working for the team or the operating model for the organization. And so when you're dealing with these kind of changes, what you need is an anchor that will help you make the right changes in the operating model and the ways of working. So just to give a simple example, in when Sriram was talking about the story, um, we were talking about uh, the the example of the QAs looking for more defects and the developers looking for um, looking to develop more features. And um, it, let's say that you merge these two departments and you create a common goal for them. Uh, the idea behind doing that and changing the operating model in that way will be rooted in the culture that you build in the organization or the mindset that you have about software development. And so there are three pillars to this culture, and we'll quickly look at those. What we are talking about here is really two aspects of agile, which is doing agile and being agile, and working these two aspects working closely together. So doing agile is really about the practices and the process, and we just saw a few of those when Vikrant was talking about how a team works in an agile format, and when Sriram was talking about how the operating model of the organization needs to also work to help agile teams. Um, and all of that is driven by the values and the culture of thinking in terms of agile. There's a question that someone put up about the PhonePe story, and we'll address that in the Q&A section. But my answer to that is also around the mindset. It's not so much about the architecture or the code or the infrastructure that you have. It's about whether you're willing to make that change or not. Um, so let's look at some of the important components of the agile culture. Now, the first important element or pillar of agile culture is purpose, and it is extremely important to create a common purpose for the people who are working on a software development project. Um, and the idea behind agile is to bring cross-functional experts together. So in the old times, if you think about the story that Sriram was talking about, there would be a physically separate QA department and a physically separate dev department, and they wouldn't even be called as part of the same team. You would actually do all of the development first and then hand it over to the QA department, and the QA department would do all the testing afterwards. Uh, so that's the pure waterfall kind of model where you finish the development phase and you move into the testing phase. Now we have brought these teams together. So we've brought developers and QAs together. That's great. That's the first step in the right direction. The second step is to make sure that they're both measured on the same metric. So if the devs and the QAs in this instance were measured on a business metric, like increasing transactions per user, instead of being measured on number of defects and number of features that they're developing, their behavior would change quite significantly, and they would be encouraged to work together. The QAs wouldn't feel cheated if they sat next to a developer and worked on a defective piece of software together, because their aim is not to find defects or to find faults with each other. Their aim is to build good software and increase the transactions that every user is having using that software. And so aligning people with a common purpose is a very important element of building the right agile. The second pillar that I want to talk about is mastery. And mastery is nothing but individual growth and organizational learning through individual growth. So each one of us wants to do a good job. When they wake up in the morning, they go to office, or these days work from home. But when you start writing code, or when you start testing, or when you start doing analysis, you want to do a really good job. And your own growth is a very big motivation factor for you as a contributor to a software development team. And if the team or if the organization doesn't take that into account, then the incentives will be misaligned. So for example, in this scenario, the team was facing this problem of late stage defects. Um, but were the developers motivated to solve that problem, to learn a new technique like TDD and solve that problem for themselves? They probably weren't, because that would be looked at as waste of time. And they would instead be only measured on how much code they are writing. And so they are not really incentivized to learn a new technique, spend some time, take a step back, think about what you're doing. And that really, again, creates a counterproductive culture for Agile. So that's the second pillar around mastery and around learning. Third pillar is around autonomy. And autonomy is the empowerment to make decisions that are meaningful in your context. And again, going back to the story, we saw that the test lead um, understood the value of doing a test check, but they were not able to make that decision. They were not empowered to change the process. They had to go to the director of quality to be able to make that change. And uh, what we want to really encourage in an agile culture is that decisions should be taken close to where the work is actually happening. Gemba is a term in Lean. It's a Japanese term, and it means the real place, the place where the work is happening, the shop floor in a Toyota context. And so the idea is to take decisions close to the work, so that they are taken in context of the work that is happening. And the second meaning of autonomy is empowerment to experiment, to try out new things in terms of processes, in terms of libraries that you want to use for development, in terms of some new techniques to deploy software. It could be anything. But the idea is, does the team and the individuals on the team have the freedom to try out new things and to bring new knowledge into the process of software development? And that's, again, a very important factor of building a good culture in the organization. And then the underlying sort of foundation to all of these things is psychological safety. And that basically means that, are you able to voice your opinions, especially if they are counter to the norm? So if you have opinions where you don't agree with everybody else in the organization, are you able to voice them? Because that's where new ideas come from. And so a lot of times we find that teams just accept the circumstances that they are in, and they are not really driven to change those circumstances because they have either given up, or they don't feel safe, because if they voice out some opinions, it might have repercussions on their promotion or their pay hike or whatever it might be. And and if you create an environment like that, you're not going to get new ideas. So that mindset and that culture is extremely important. Let's quickly look at some concrete measures that you can take in each of these areas. So for purpose, like we said, aligning people towards a common purpose is the first step in the right direction. You should also start incentivizing group success much more than individual success. So for example, in ThoughtWorks, we don't have a lot of individual appreciation from an organization standpoint. When a team is successful, when they make a successful production release, or when they achieve the right business outcomes, we celebrate quite a bit in ThoughtWorks. But we don't have developer of the month kind of appreciation from an org standpoint, because that creates unhealthy competition between developers. And that's not what we really want. We want to make sure that everybody is paying attention to what the team needs to do. And so everybody is aligned to make the team successful. Similarly, celebrate collaboration over individual heroism. And these are deep changes that you would need to make. Like you would need to rethink your performance review system. You would need to rethink your mindset about how you judge people's performance. So you have to be careful about these changes. They're widespread changes in the organization. Um, on the mastery side, just incentivizing learning, making space for learning for people, creating structures that help people focus on their growth, uh, putting together communities of practice, like a community of business analysts or a community of infrastructure developers, who would bring in new ideas from the industry, who would share knowledge with each other about how they are doing their work. Those are all very powerful mechanisms of spreading knowledge inside the organization. And again, a very important element of agile culture. On the autonomy side, you have to celebrate learning from failure. First of all, you have to accept failure, right? If you're going to try out new things, you are going to fail. That is a given. And so the leadership and the organization has to build that into their plans, and then encourage experimentation, encourage trying out new things and learning from them. Because that's the way that you will provide power to people to do the right things for your users. Um, and on the psychological safety side, we have to build an environment where ideas that are counter to the popular opinion are encouraged and taken in, and really inspected for any value in them, and then incorporated into your way of thinking or the way you work. Uh, Sometimes it's not so much about not feeling safe, but it could just be that I don't have the time to reflect. And so you have to create a space for reflection. You have to make sure that the team spends some time taking a step back and re-looking at how they're working, so that they're able to improve their situation. Otherwise, you're just stuck in day-to-day delivery and a day-to-day rut, and you don't take time to reflect. And then the third thing that you need to do in terms of psychological safety is create a culture of feedback. Voicing an opinion when you don't like something or when you want to appreciate something is an important aspect of how teams work together, and how people work together. So creating a culture where feedback is a routine thing is very important, so that people feel comfortable voicing their concerns and their discomfort with each other on a day-to-day basis. And that leads to very highly cohesive teams. There's actually a deep study that Google has done on psychological safety, and they find that teams are just in multiples more productive when people are feeling psychologically safe. And one of the metrics that they use is how much time does each person spend speaking while that team is in a meeting. So if everyone roughly speaks for the same time, that means that there's psychological safety in that team. So that might be a good way to think about psychological safety in your teams as well. So to summarize, we have seen a lot of our clients and a lot of people in the industry, organizations in the industry, focus a lot on the Scrum process. Scrum because it is very popular, and process because everybody gets it, right? Like everybody understands that you have to do a stand-up, you have to do a retrospective, you have to plan the iteration. So these are things that are intuitive for a lot of people. And so a lot of people end up spending a lot of energy on putting the right process together and rolling out Scrum in that sense. And that's a good first step. That's a necessary thing that you have to do. But Agile product delivery needs a few other things for it to be really effective. And so what we want you to take away from this webinar is that you have to pay attention to engineering technique. One of the main things that you have to understand is that from a management and a mindset standpoint, you can embrace change. But if your code doesn't support you and your code is not nimble enough, then you're not going to be able to work on that change. So your code needs to also support how you're thinking and your ability to incorporate change. And for that, practices like TDD, refactoring, managing tech debt, all of these are very important elements that you have to keep in mind. And so focusing on engineering is an important aspect. Focusing on the operating model of the organization is also an important aspect, because you have to create an environment that will help teams succeed. Sometimes we put the right processes and the right ceremonies in the team, but there are other environmental factors that stop the team from succeeding. And you saw that quite clearly through Shriram's story. So having the right organization model is important. And lastly, cultivating a culture of collaboration, learning, and experimentation is a very important step, so that you're able to build the right software delivery organization as a whole, and make it fun and useful and meaningful for employees as well as end users of the organization. So that's our presentation content on the webinar, and we can move on to the
Thank you
Q&A
so much.
session.
Thank you so much, Akshay. And it's a very enlightening session in a sense that people are aware about agile terms, agile terminology like Scrum, all, but they don't know how to build that agile in the team and the organization. So that's a very insightful session. Now we'll start the Q&A session, and the first question I'll come to Vikrant. Vikrant, we have talked about the case study, and there's a question on the implementation part of it. So the question I'll just read out to you. For example, in PhonePe, wasn't it possible more so that microservices and standardized architecture of UPI rather than any SDLC methodology?
Okay. Yeah. So I think definitely, see, technology definitely is an enabler, and having the right architecture under the hoods, definitely enables, the overall, your ability to respond to change. But I think in this case, I think our focus from this example was more on the mindset, the agile mindset. Technically, you could still use a good app. But if your mindset or if your ways of working is not agile, architecture will help you to a certain extent. So our focus here was more on the way this was handled and the agility that was shown by the organizations to really make it happen.
Great. The second question is on the budget. So I will reach out to Shriram. I think he can answer it. He has covered the story, which has so many stakeholders involved. Shriram, please. How the budget can be managed in agile into external, some change in the external factors comes in. There's a change in the budget, but is also iterable. So as a project priorities get iterated, even the budget will also get iterated multiple times in agile. So how you tackle that?
So yeah, I mean, you can treat it two ways, right? One, you can, depending on the organization, sometimes the budget is what it is, right? And you have to basically manage the project according to the product, according to the budget, right? So if the budget is, say, limited compared to the product's ambition, then obviously you have to pick and choose where you want to evolve the product according to the budget, right? And that is the reality in most cases. So I don't know if I'm.
Akshay, you have talked about organization culture, agile culture, but the famous term, and we read so many books about lean. The lean mindset is the most common book which we came to know about. So can you just cover a few bits about lean, how lean can be implemented, and how it is different from the agile, whether it's a part of agile or whether it brings some new conception?
Yeah, sure. So lean is derived from the Toyota manufacturing methodology. And so it has its roots in manufacturing setup. Yeah, are you able to hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Please
Yes, we can.
Yeah, so it has its roots in the manufacturing setup. And so there are elements of lean which translate very well into software development, like managing waste, for example, or elimination of waste is a very important concept. And waste in the lean methodology is thought of any any inventory that is sitting around. And so there are several case studies about limiting work in progress and limiting the inventory of the work that you pick up. Going back to the budget question that that Sriram was beginning to answer, if you have limited um, money to spend on software, then you would want to prioritize what you want to build, and you want to ensure that you limit your work in progress so that the most valuable things get finished and are out in production as fast as possible instead of waiting around in your development process. So you could write code for 100 stories and they could be waiting around for testing. Or you could write code for 20 stories, but complete testing, complete deployment, and ensure that those 20 stories are actually available for your users to test. And so Lean really talks about the second approach to software development.
I think Shriram has asked for the whole illustration of the question, but I'll read it out for everyone's benefit. So people are asking, like, there's a estimated epics which they have given it to the project development team, and they want now the delivery to be done in 2 months. So there's a mismatch in the requirements and the development side. Basically, what we want to say at a very high level. So how a product owner or Scrum Master can come up and solve those kind of issues or fill the gaps in the understanding. Because what people understand from Agile that you can complete the project very fast. Agile means you complete everything in very short time. But in SDLC, you have to take a long year to complete the project. So how to set up the expectations? So I think Vikrant can answer this.
Yeah. So I think if I understand that question correctly, it's about that, okay, if the epics have been pre-estimated and given to the development team, and if it's taking more time to develop, then how to really address that by the product owners and the developers, correct? Yeah. Okay. So I think, so what we have to think about is that if this is happening, so first of all, why is the estimation for the epics happening separately, right? Ideally, if the epics are being used, for, let's say, typically they're used for quarterly planning, so they are larger chunks of work that are put together in the form of epics, right? And then they are sort of like put together into the product roadmap, and then they are then tracked against, right? Bottom line here is that, like in my experience, at least what I've seen and what I use to kind of coach with teams, is that first of all, those epics and the estimation, the description of those or the detailing of those, etc., must be happening, along with the people who are actually going to work on it, right? If they're not done along with the people who are going to work on them, they may be used as guesstimates just for like a larger level budgeting kind of planning, but they cannot be a binding as such, from a team perspective. So really, it is if the epics and their estimations are being done separately, it's a sign of a siloed type of work culture over there, which should be looked at. And in my opinion, those estimations, etc., should really involve the people who are actually going to work on it. Additionally, if there are tight timelines that are still there, which we typically see in organizations, I think if the teams are set up correctly, if there's a dedicated product owner, for the products, right? They are the ones who are really kind of like, creating the vision and roadmap for the product, right? So given the timelines, given the budget that is there, if that is kind of fixed, then I think it all boils down to the value generation by doing continuous reprioritization of the features. So what is it that makes sense to do and build in that much of budget and that much of timeline? That's going to make the most impact and the value generated from the product, right? So that's the way when the POs can really help and like continue to scale with the product development.
So you have used the word value, which is very intrinsic to agile project. So can you give some suggestions on what are the good models which are there outside, or which are the good industry practices for deriving the value and understanding the meaning of value? It's not only financial value, but your organization values and other factors also come into picture to derive it. So if you can just give some suggestions.
Yeah. So I think I will not go into kind of a model or anything, but I'll give a very, very quick example. Okay, I think that will best to sort of understand. So as part of a development project that I was part of, in one of my previous projects, We were building a simple, application for doing patient outreach. It was from healthcare domain. We were building a software that would help the nurses do the patient's outreach and figure out that, okay, after the discharge, do they still have any issues? That do they need any help from the hospital? Do they need help with understanding the medications, etc. Right? Idea was to make sure that those patients do not come back again and readmit in the hospital for the similar type of disease. Right? So this was something to do with the bundle payments initiative that was happening in the US. Yeah? The nurses and their associates used to do these things on a Excel sheet. Yeah. They had some people working with them who knew certain formulas, and they were able to sort of help them with that list. But the list was increasing. There were thousands of patients. Yeah. When we met with them, we gave them an absolute minimal piece of working software within 3 weeks that could do searching and that could flag a patient that was supposed to be outreached. Okay. And they used it. And the very next day they called us, the nurses called us, and they said that, you have made my life so easy. I can't thank you enough. Yeah. In my opinion, that is the real value. That is the real value generated for the end user by just providing this much of functionality. It was not even 1/5 of the overall functionality that we delivered later, right? Through the continuous evolution. But that is so how the users perceive it. Like, is it really adding value in their day-to-day job, right? That is one way to look at that, and just a very, very small example to just explain that.
So thanks for it, and it's really apt to cover the value and why it is important to capture the value. So Shriram, I come to you. There's a question on from one of our attendees. So how they can choose whether they can go ahead to do a project in Agile or some other technique? What is a good parameter to decide first, or not to decide whether we should not go with Agile for this project? If you can cover both aspects. So to go with Agile or not to go Agile, what are the situations which will decide that?
See, I have been in ThoughtWorks for more than 15 years now, and I have not encountered a single situation where we would have to decide that, oh, we can't use Agile in this context, right? There are, of course, you'll have to tweak certain things. Like if you're building software for a pacemaker in the heart, that will be subject to much more rigorous testing. Whereas some of, and you can't do A/B testing on a pacemaker in the heart, right? So based on the context, you will make certain choices. But broadly, there is, if there are team who really understand the Agile principles, then there is right from writing software to the Mars rover that runs on Mars, to a pacemaker in the heart, to some kind of satellite launch testing software, anything. Whether it's a combination of hardware and software, you can always apply Agile principles appropriately and do certain things to greater or lesser extent based on the context.
Thanks so much. So last question from my side, and then we'll Akshay, to you, there's a question on how Agile can be implemented for an early startup.
Sorry, could you repeat for an early startup?
Yeah, so how an early startup adopt this Agile culture, Agile practices which we have discussed today. Can you guide something to these startups who are participating today and want to understand this?
Yeah, I think early startups are good candidates for Agile because they don't have a lot of baggage. And Agile can be as lightweight as you want it to be. There are a lot of people who are interested in making very heavyweight as well. And especially when it comes to enterprise implementations, we've seen a lot of very convoluted heavyweight implementations of Agile. But for a startup, all you need to do is ensure that everybody is working together on a common goal, and that's the beginning of working in Agile. You can decide, the kind of architecture and the organization structure and that kind of stuff. But really, in an early startup, there's not a lot that you're going to decide in terms of that. You'll have 10, 15 people. And as long as they are all working together and focused on a common goal that relates to the business that the startup is in, you've done well. Now, the thing that you have to pay attention to is that in an early startup, you're usually trying to prove the value of the idea that you have. So you're not still in a growth mode. You're still proving a hypothesis that you have. So let's say that it's a food delivery startup because there's so few of them, and so you're making a hypothesis that my food delivery startup is going to be better than Swiggy or Zomato or someone else, and you have some idea in your mind why that is so. So the first thing that you have to do is not build software. The first thing that you have to do is prove that that idea is actually valid. And so in the initial period, the goal for your cross-functional team is not going to be to build software. It is actually going to be about validating these ideas. And so you'll have several different ways in which you will try to validate these ideas and parts of this idea. So the outcome that the common goal that you have is going to be a little different in an early startup mode. But once you validate the idea and once you realize that actually drone delivery of food is the thing that is actually going to work out, then you need to start building software. And that is when you go into building reliable software. So there's a tweak that you have to make, that first you're trying out a lot of quick and dirty things, knowing that it is not going to be reliable. It's not production ready software at all. But once you decide that this is the valid idea that I need to build on, then you start optimizing for reliability, and then you get into a different mode of working. But I think the way people work together, the way they collaborate, the way they freely share knowledge across that 10 people group, all of those things apply right from day one. So in that sense, it's a very conducive environment for applying Agile.
One last question which I want to ask from my NPCI background, which is a product company. So for the product managers, what is the good recommendation from each one of you? Can just write one good recommendation for the product managers who are listening to this webinar. Starting with Shrikant, Vikrant.
One recommendation for product managers. They're very hard to say actually. They will be, so many, but I think, listen to the customer. I think that is the key. Understand exactly what they want and how the prioritization being done is adding value in their lives. Focus on that. Listen to them and just continuously use that for creating the product.
Sriram.
I have been a product manager earlier in my life, and I have made the mistake of investing too much in a feature because I liked it or because my senior management liked it, and sometimes it would not give the corresponding results in the market, right? So irrespective of our personal liking for a feature, it will be a good idea to do it in thin slices, release it to the market in small slices, see whether there is enough potential for adoption before investing too much in it.
Akshay.
Cool. And my advice is going to be similar, which is stop starting and start finishing. Right? So start finishing what you've already begun, rather than bringing in new work into the pipeline. And that's a classic lean quote that is useful for any product development organization.
Great. Thanks for your time today, and it's a very insightful session. Maybe we'll come up with some more questions and we'll reach out to you for your guidance. Thanks for your time today.
Thanks
nice. Thank you guys for joining us.
Pleasure. It was a pleasure. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.